Star Trek Picard, Season 3, Episode 2, Disengage, also known as Guardians of the Galaxy. We begin 2 weeks ago, and we see Jack Crusher, and he's listening to some very non-Star Trek music that made it seem like we were watching Guardians of the Galaxy. As it turns out, he is quite the little con man. They are taking medical supplies to people who need them, or at least it appears to be so. However, in order to accomplish this, he is trading weapons to groups to gain access to areas where people are sick.
Well, that scene for me, that was like the last serious scene, which was the first scene in this episode of the whole episode. What that scene reminded me of, and I mean this as a compliment because I agree the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff was the music. I got a very Guardians of the Galaxy feel to it. But that scene reminded me of, remember in The Expanse when Diago and his uncle were being boarded by the Martian patrols?
Yes.
That's what that kind of reminded me of, was that part of The Expanse, that episode of The Expanse. The stories diverged after that, and I'm saying that as a compliment because a series based on just some sort of transport between planets and stuff, that might have been interesting. I'm not saying that this character would be what I'd want in there, but this was the last scene that I thought was interesting as far as taking the material seriously. Because obviously you got a lot to go here and I'll just save my stuff for later, but this was the last serious scene to be taken seriously in this whole episode.
That's when we jump back to the present. We're back on the Helios with Jack Crusher, Picard, Riker, and Beverly in a failing stasis pod. Jack is telling us how they've been hunted for months and it's always different people. I mean, it's bizarre because he says that they're not there to negotiate, yet they're just sitting there. And it's clear that they don't want to just blow them up either, so why are they there? And so Picard was intelligent enough to put up transport blockers because then they try to transport Jack out of there. So it's obvious that what they're after is Jack.
That scene just had some weird dialogue too, like they were using their sensors and, the other ship, they have a 100% probability of destroying us. The computer was saying this. And then the ship shortly after fired a bunch of what looked like torpedoes or something at the ship and destroyed the shuttle. There were like 4 or 5 of these torpedoes, I guess, just to destroy a shuttle. And I'm scratching my head going, but I thought it was a 100% chance of being destroyed. I'm nitpicking at this point because it gets worse after here, but this is where it started going wrong. The transporter inhibitors was the last intelligent thing that they were doing in this episode.
Yeah, because then we go over to the Titan. Seven is practically begging Captain Shaw to intervene. He says something about them being relics with brushed brass medals, golden boys, and they dug their own grave and took Seven with them. And then he dismissed her. It was a weird scene. It was really weird. Everything is just being played so over the top. So anyway, then we skip to Rafi.
Rafi cannot act, by the way. The actress who plays her, I'm now convinced, cannot act. These scenes with Rafi were unintentionally hilarious because of how bad she is as an actor.
So she's all upset about all the people who were killed at that Starfleet recruiting building. I guess 117 people were killed. I guess that's supposed to be an impressive number. However, being Americans and after 9/11, it's like whoop-de-friggin' do, 117 people. I know that sounds callous, but if you're trying to up the drama, then you really need to up it much higher than that for us.
I think this was Kurtzman's trick. This was them saying, no, look, we actually do care about human life. Look, see, we do. But wait till Mollie explains later how much they care about human life.
Rafi is reaching out to her handler. She saw on the news that Starfleet and the Federation are blaming some Ferengi named Lorak Toluca, and she knows it's just a scapegoat. Just because he was in on the deal doesn't make him the actual, I hate to say bomber, but whatever the hell, terrorist, I don't know. She wants to go after whoever really did do it, and apparently there was some redacted statement from somebody called Sneed who said that they brokered the deal, and so she wants to go after them, and then of course her handler says, denied!
By handler, she's talking and she's actually yelling at text on a screen that has a voice. That's what this scene consists of, is her showing outrage against text on a screen. It is so unintentionally hilarious. I cannot convey convey it in words. A person would have to watch that scene in order to see how ridiculously telenovela this whole thing is. The whole episode is telenovela. It's ramped up to ridiculous levels.
Yeah, that scene with Rafi yelling at the AI at her computer screen anyway. It was just an overdramatic information dump. I mean, it was really, really bad. And I'll just finish up the Rafi parts and then we'll go back to the main story. So anyways, Rafi, of course, doesn't listen. She goes back to, I guess, what appears to be Metalis Prime because it looks like that Blade Runner world with all the shit floating around again.
I guess she did leave because she was flying her ship all the way to try to stop that terrorist attack. Then when that didn't work, I guess she turned her ship around and just drove all the way back.
I don't know. I mean, I think this whole episode she was back on Metalis Prime. I don't know. They're not very good at letting you know where she is. But she goes and she meets up with her ex-husband. Of course, that turns into you have to choose between our son and meeting up with this Sneed guy, because apparently he owns a bar and he knows some nefarious people, and he turns a blind eye to going on in his bar.
For the people who say you just have to accept this series with some of the legacy characters and just move on, it's not tied to season 1 or 2. Her ex-husband brought up her meeting with her kid that was in season 1 of Picard, right? When his wife was pregnant.
Yeah.
So again, they didn't have to tie this back to any of the previous seasons, but they did. So I don't know how we're supposed to ignore the previous seasons when they keep going back to them. This is a perfect example of going back to a previous season.
Yeah. So the ex-husband is giving her grief because her head goes to the webs and conspiracy, and that leads to drugs and going down dark rabbit holes. I mean, it was absolutely obnoxious with the overdramatic whisper acting. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but oh my goodness, it's like they want to have these intense yelling conversations, but instead of raising their voices, they forcefully whisper at each other. It is one of the most ridiculous things I have ever seen. I've never seen anyone do that in real life. I mean, it's bizarre.
And her husband, whoever the actor was, he wasn't much better of an actor than she was.
No, they were breathy whisper yelling at each other.
So as they were going back and forth in their argument, it was just one bad actor and then another bad actor and then another bad. It was, again, unintentionally hilarious. I was laughing through a lot of this episode, so take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, so of course she chooses an introduction to Sneed instead of having him intervene with their son. So she goes and meets up with this Sneed person. Sneed is sitting there sucking on a hookah. It looked to me like the caterpillar scene from Alice in Wonderland. I mean, this Sneed person really did look a lot like the caterpillar, just the way that they'd done the Ferengi makeup on this person. It was so ridiculous and over the top. And Rafi says, oh, well, I don't work for Starfleet. I work for this Toluca person who they're trying to blame all this on. And Sneed's like, well, you can't possibly be working for Toluca, but you have to prove it to me by taking these drugs first. So she puts the drugs in her eye, and it's like we're watching Andromeda.
She's Becca Valentine.
Yeah.
She took some flash, and I'm just wondering if now, because back on the Andromeda, if we're talking Andromeda from the early 2000s, Becca Valentine, Uncle Sid, was the one that was trying to get information out of her and forced her, basically put these flash eye drops in her eyes, which were drugs that caused you to have reflexes that were greater, among other things. I'm curious if this is going to be an ongoing theme now of Rafi fighting this off, just like Becca did, because later on in Andromeda, they revisited this topic where Becca was getting back on the Flash in order to do something. When I saw that eye drop going in her eye and on Rafi, the first thing I thought of was Becca Valentine on Andromeda. We've already seen the Andromeda ship, so we're just going to have to wait and see where this goes. Yeah, that whole scene was ridiculous.
Yeah, in this case, the name of the drug is Splinter, and it was just one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. Just Sneed telling, oh, you smell like Starfleet. And then she smells like Section 31, and it's like, oh god, no, not that crap. So then she's got the drugs in her, and she's like, oh, I work for Toluca, and then Sneed says, no, you don't, and then produces Toluca's head, and it's like, oh my god, so there's the severed head. We were saying last week, well, at least there's no severed heads or eye gouging. Well, here you've got the severed heads.
This is the respect for sentient life. Remember, Rafi was so outraged earlier and the series was supposed to show, no, we care about sentient life. Not so much here. Oh, this guy was a mobster-ish person. Yeah, but that was still a severed head we saw, now wasn't it? And he picked it up and showed it to her. It was,
yeah.
I don't know.
So Sneed is going to take the, crystals or whatever Rafi was going to pay him with, and his hand's on the table, and Rafi stabs him through the hand, and just as Sneed was about to have his hired muscle attack her and kill her, get rid of her, then you see them in the background. One of them has a bat'leth come through their chest from the back, and, that Wharf is finally there, and he kills them all. He decapitates Sneed, his head goes flying, and then he picks up Rafi and says, I told you not to, whatever.
He was the handler.
Yeah, we couldn't have seen that coming a mile away.
I told you. Just go ahead.
So that was the last we saw of Rafi in that episode. Thank you, God. But heads flying everywhere, and just oh my God. And it's just, oh, geez. And then it gets worse.
Or better if you like cheese. If season 2, when one of the Soongs, I forget what his name was, if you thought it was funny when he was trying to run the Picards down in his car, then you're gonna like what Mollie's gonna say next, because it was so ridiculous.
So Seven says to Shaw, she says to him, you can be the hero who saved 2 heroes, or you can be the captain who let 2 legends die, or something to that effect. And of course, she's playing on his ego. So what does he go and do? Well, of course, he chooses to try to be the hero to save 2 heroes. Back in the Helios, they're locked in a tractor beam. They have no way out of this. So then, oh my God.
This is so ridiculous.
So they're in the tractor beam, and then all of a sudden, the Titan kind of flashes right in between the 2 ships and separates them, and I just started laughing out loud.
The other ship, gets pushed away. It's like when if you ran into a room and used your shoulder to, ram into somebody and knocked them backwards. It was hilarious. I
mean, we had to back it up and watch that again because, oh my goodness. And they're doing this inside a nebula too, which allegedly there's supposed to be all sorts of sensor interference and everything. This was such a precision move. It just, oh my goodness. I couldn't stop laughing. It was just hilarious. It was so over the top. And that's when I'm kind of like, if I look at this more like a Sharknado kind of asylum film, then all of a sudden this takes on a whole new light. It's not as good as Sharknado, but I started laughing throughout the rest of the episode.
We paused and went back and rewatched it. We laughed again. The laughs continued for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, so then the Titan is trying to beam Picard and crew out of the Helios, but they can't get a lock on them. And then the transport inhibitors. So then, and I'm sitting there yeah, duh, I remembered that before you idiots did. So then they shoot the transport inhibitors.
But at least that had some semblance of logic to it. So even though it was done in a way that was silly, at least I can say there was some logic there on why that didn't work.
Yeah, but they made those characters forgetful on purpose.
Buffoons, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, to up the drama. And I'm like, oh, goodness gracious. So then they're beamed onto the Titan, and so they're over there. The other ship is finally hailing them, and oh my God, this is... This is when we get our first contact with the Amanda Plummer Captain Vadek. I'll grant you this, that actress, she... If this is what she was given to work with, these were the lines she was given, then you know what? She carried this off better than a lot of people probably could have, because I don't know how you could do this without laughing your ass off.
And by better... This does not mean, oh my gosh, she pulled off this great, intimidating. It was so over-the-top ridiculous. Mollie pointed out while we were watching, and as she was talking, and then she looked at her bird people around her on this bridge. What did she remind you of?
She reminded me of the Penguin, specifically the version from the television show Gotham.
We were laughing so hard. Every line she was doing, then she was kind of cackling. I was expecting her to have the Penguin in the old 60s TV series used to have that cigarette holder thing sticking out of his mouth, and he'd go, wah, wah, wah.
We had everything except the wah, wah, wah. Because then she lights up like this cigar, and she's got like the plastic tip on the end and everything like that. Oh my goodness gracious. And of course, you know, and this goes back to like, this could actually be a holodeck program because somehow she recognizes Captain Shaw immediately. Well, she asks him how his day is going or some nonsense like that. And he's like, oh, well, I was having a good morning until this. And she says something along the lines of that she's glad he's remained functional after seeing his psychological profile. I'll admit that was pretty hilariously funny. But again, how did she have that information? And that doesn't really belong in Star Trek. It was just one of those things like, this is ridiculous. This is so ridiculous. I cannot help but laugh at this.
Her delivery, Mollie gave it a more credible delivery than how Amanda Plummer delivered it. I cannot convey to you the delivery of the line and how ridiculous, even when she was trying to, she being the Amanda Plummer character, when she was trying to give serious reads to stuff, it was so ridiculous. It really was like we were watching a 60s Batman series.
Well, yeah, as I said, I think she did an outstanding job given what she had to work with. And then she says hello to Picard and says something about it's good to see him in the synthetic flesh. So there's still that. So at least they're admitting to that. But at the same time, it's like, why would you admit to that? Like, why didn't you get rid of that? Why didn't Q get rid of that? Oh, God.
Why don't they ever talk about this other than this quick joke line? Because I've got lots of things that I could talk about with him being a robot. One is he actually Picard? Because Star Trek has had many episodes, including the TOS episode with Nurse Chapel's, I guess, ex-lover on the planet with those robots. And then it turned out he reproduced himself into a robot and it actually wasn't the same person. And then obviously the Soong stuff through the TNG era of trying to figure out what life is, what life isn't. And there's so many opportunities here with the Picard character to explore that, but all we do, the only real reference is we get a quick throwaway joke line like this.
I guess they don't want to explore that. Yeah, I guess maybe they think that, you know, when they established in TNG that Data should have his own autonomy instead of being treated like a thing they should be able to take apart and research, that was it. It's over.
They determined that he was a sentient being with rights. But the question now is Picard the same person? That's a different topic they did not explore.
Yeah, but I don't think that the people who write this stuff really understand that. But anyway, continuing on from a discussion that's actually far, far better than what they wrote in this episode. Amanda Plummer, Captain Vadic, she mentions the bounty on Jack's head. She lowers her shields so that the Titan can scan her. This is essentially a way to show off all the weapons she has. And the number of weapons on this ship is so over the top. Again, this goes back to, is this really an Asylum production? It was really crazy.
It's like a kid who sits with a notepad, like in class, not taking notes, and so draws this starship, but then draws all these guns and stuff on it, because, you know, when you're 8 years old and you're sitting in class, you're gonna, like, overdo everything. That's what this was. You got 20,000 this and 15,000 that, and, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers. It was so comedic how, when the person who was reading off what the scanner was saying, all the weapons that they had, I was just laughing my ass off. It was so hilarious.
Well, that's because it was the spaceship equivalent of the Dildozer from Idiocracy.
Yep.
Like, so big and overpowered that you can't even fit it inside the stadium door kind of thing. It was ridiculous. So then, and this gets even better. So anyway, to demonstrate her power, she uses her tractor beam to grab the Helios and throw it at the Titan. And so the Titan gets their shields up, and the Helios nails them a good one. Some damage was definitely done to the Titan. And they had Geordie's daughter, Ensign LaForge, explained it as it was blunt forced trauma to their ship or whatever. I mean, it was like, oh my God, I cannot believe it.
It was so ridiculous. The CGI they used to show it, just grab it and fling it. That's that scene in the trailers where you see that one starship that's scraping above the other one. That's this scene. The ship that was flung was scraping against the Titan after it was chucked at it. It was hilarious. We backed that up and watched that again, and we laughed and laughed.
So, Picard's like, what did she just do? And that's when Ensign LaForge explained, she threw a ship at us, sir. I mean, unbelievable. Unfreaking believable. So then, it turns out that Jack is a con man, and, so Shaw is basically telling Picard and the rest of them, well, you're all getting what you deserve. He may as well have just stamped his foot while he was saying this. It was like some little kid, like a 10-year-old or younger, throwing a tantrum. You're getting what you deserve. I mean, oh my God.
Shaw, during this whole episode, I don't know how he got in charge of a starship. He is continuing the caricature of, I'm thinking what Mollie called it last week. She said, it's like what a woke writer would write to write a patriarchal white male. They made this guy cowardly. Yes, he said he was protecting his crew, but the decisions he were making, he just seemed like he was such an ineffective leader. It was hilarious watching him just do his incompetence. This is the most incompetent captain I think I've ever seen.
It was obvious that he was petty, he was jealous. Every decision he made was try to advance his own career or preserve his position. This guy, I don't know how he got in charge of anything other than it was just written that way. And I think that's what a lot of people fail to understand, talking about Beverly Crusher in the previous episode. And it's like, oh, but, she was there and she had to do something. She had to shoot that guy. Yeah, but a writer put her in that situation and then had her react that way.
This isn't reality TV where you're just filming reality. The writer wrote this, and then the people who are making the production built the sets, the actors read the script. When you see something on screen, it's because a writer wrote it that way. This isn't reality TV where there's just a camera filming reality.
Yeah. I am a writer. I criticize writing. And when I say that a character being in that situation was really stupid, that's my opinion as a writer and someone who criticizes writing. So when I say that it was ridiculous that they had this senior citizen on this ship hiding from these other ships, and she locks her adult son in the closet, and then she tries to take on the intruders with a pump action rifle, and then ends up getting herself shot. And I'm not supposed to think that was a stupid thing to do in the first place. I'm criticizing the writer. She used to be a much smarter character, so he took a character who used to be something completely different, and he changed her into what he wanted her to be so that he could have that situation. So this is 100% on the writer. When you are writing for an established franchise and you are using characters that were established when you were a little kid or even before that, you have to treat that with respect. They call that playing in somebody else's sandbox. You shouldn't get into the sandbox and just whip out your dick and take a piss all over everything. And I have seen way too many writers doing that in the last decade at least. They don't seem to have any respect for the franchise or the fans or the original creators or anything. It's all about them and putting their mark on the franchise. And I'm tired of seeing writers lift their leg so that they can make a franchise theirs. If they want something that's exclusively theirs, then they should write something new. Stop taking over something that belongs to somebody else. So that's all I have to say about that. We get this weird interaction between Riker and Picard. Riker's like, don't you see what I see? And Picard's like, don't speculate. And obviously this is all about whether or not the kid is his son. Picard is confronting Jack, and he's like, that's not the Beverly that I knew. And that's when Jack is like, oh, is anybody still the person you knew? Obviously, I had a problem with that in the trailer, because I complained about it in the video we made about that. And the whole scene was just ridiculous. Everything is just played up to the nth degree, so they can turn the drama up to an 11. It just, ugh. And that's why I've spent half the episode laughing at it. So then the kid is saying, oh, well, Beverly taught him everything he knows, and that he never had a father. And And, oh, God.
This is a telenovela. There were so many scenes that were just telenovela ramped up. Not just normal soap opera stuff. No, I mean telenovela where it was so over the top.
Yeah, so then they have 18 minutes to decide what to do, whether or not they're going to turn over Jack or what. So, Shaw is all for just turning Jack over. And he says something ridiculous like, can you trust him to love his mother more than himself? And then Riker is like, Jack Crusher is a person, and we can't just turn him over. And so then Jack escapes being, in the brig because he's just that clever. And the guy who
How did he escape out of the brig? He was arrested and taken to the brig, detained and put in the brig. And then there was this pretentious line like he was talking to the security officer that was manning the detention center, and he was like, what's the level of force field on here? Because you have to tell me by Starfleet regulations. And then he had this device that shorted it out. Did he have that up his butt or something? Because didn't they search him before they stuck him in the...
Apparently not. They must have just shoved him in there.
It was so ridiculous. I was laughing again.
And of course, the guy who was supposed to be guarding him was acting like such a jackass too. And again, another white male written to be some sort of jackass buffoon. Then,
he was like, go ahead and put your tongue on the force field and find out. That's the type of lines you got in this, real Star Trek-like.
Yeah, real mature. So then Riker goes to wake up Beverly, and the doctor's like, you can't do that, she needs her rest. And then Riker's like, I know what I'm doing. Or he didn't actually say that, but that was the gist of it. And so then he picks up this hypo spray and nails her one in the neck with it and wakes her up. And it's like, how the hell did he know what was in there? How was that just sitting there? How did he know the dosage? I mean, it was one of the most ridiculous scenes ever.
At best, what he should have done was commanded that doctor to wake her up. You don't sit there and grab the medication and just jam it in her neck. This is an elderly lady.
And she looks it, too.
And she was just hanging on in sick bay, and he decides with almost no medical training except maybe some basic Starfleet 2-week course or something to just take this and jam it in her. And the doctor on staff, there were a nurse, I couldn't tell if it was a nurse or a doctor. This person said, wait, don't do that. And Riker just decided, now just jam this in her neck and wake her up because the story needs it.
Yeah. So then we're back to Shaw and Picard, and Shaw says to Picard, this isn't a diplomatic issue. And then Vadic comes back, and then she's like, tick-tock, shit clock's ticking, Rick. And that was a reference to Trailer Park Boys in case anybody doesn't get it. But anyways, so then she's telling them the name of her vessel, and it's the Shrike. And it's apparently this little bird that eats carrion.
It's the penguin, man. She's the penguin.
Oh my God. And talking about how it's so patient and it does everything with surgical precision and oh God. And then I'll peck and jab and take every piece that makes you. And I'm like, how the hell is she gonna do that? She's just picking off pieces of the ship, or is this about Shaw and his mental problems that she magically somehow knew about? I mean, oh my God. So then they finally realize that Jack has escaped from the brig, and Shaw puts the ship on lockdown, and Seven somehow is no longer confined to her quarters.
Well, you didn't mention that.
Oh, yeah.
So Shaw relieved Seven of duty and told her she was confined to quarters. And then later on during this crisis, she's out and giving orders to people. And I'm like, but I'm sure Shaw must have told the crew, first officers confined, do not listen to them. So how did that change?
Yeah, well, she's magically out, and she's going to the transporter room. And of course, that's where Seven finds Jack, and she tells Shaw, and he tells her she may have just earned her post back. He says to Picard, whoever this kid might be, he's not worth the lives of my crew, and that Shaw's gonna turn him over, basically, to this bird person.
Well, what Shaw said earlier is he said that since we are outside of Federation space, safeguarding my crew is Starfleet regulations demand that I do that first before anything else. And I'm like, really? Really? I'm not saying I side with Picard or Shaw in this ridiculous situation, but really? When you're outside of Federation space, you only safeguard your crew and that's it? That doesn't seem right.
That's when Riker shows up on the bridge with Beverly. This is one of the greatest conversations of all time. So Riker brings decrepit Beverly to the bridge, and Picard stares at her from across the room. Beverly looks away. He silently asks the question, "Is he my son?" The look on her face says everything. He is. I mean, this is the kind of writing that we're getting now from Star Trek. Telenovela, yeah, that pretty much says it all. The amped up drama, the over-the-top stories, the paternity stuff, and just, oh, goodness gracious. But this could still all be nothing but a holodeck program.
I think it still is, and when we get done with the synopsis, I'm going to explain why, what I'm seeing in the episode that leads me to believe we are in a holodeck program, because if we're not, this is some of the most ridiculous Star Trek ever put out there.
All right, then I'll just continue with the story here. So Shaw's about to hand over Jack, and Picard shouts, "Belay those orders. The boy stays here." And then, of course, Shaw's like, "Well, why are you doing this?" And Picard says, "Because he's my son."
How is he doing this? In the previous episode, when they sat with Captain Shaw in his whatever the hell that was, eating a meal together, or he was eating the meal and they were just sitting there, Captain Shaw made a big point of saying, "You're a retired admiral and you're a captain without a seat. Basically, I don't have to listen to you. That's why 7 of 9 had to take the Titan to where they wanted to go, because Shaw says you basically have no power here." All of a sudden now, Picard can just say, "Belay that order," when he said earlier, "I want to go to this destination," and Shaw said, "No, you have no power here." So what the hell was that change? That in the first episode, he made it very clear he didn't respect the retired admiral or the captain without a chair. But now Admiral Picard, retired Admiral Picard, says something, and Shaw's like, "Okay, if you're going to do this, fine, but it's on your head." That made no sense at all based on what happened in the previous episode.
The only way I can justify that is that because Jack is Picard's son, now this makes this a diplomatic issue, because they are trying to extract a diplomat's son from this Federation ship to collect a bounty that's on his head. That's the only reason that I can...
That still doesn't make any sense. Picard was not assigned to this mission. So Shaw's assertion in that first episode still applies.
Yeah.
Picard was a retired admiral, and Shaw didn't think he had to listen to him. So this change of character made no sense whatsoever. The only reason when somebody's appointed as a diplomatic leader of a mission that the captain has to bow to their wishes is because Starfleet says you will let this person is in charge of this mission. Nobody did that for Shaw with Picard, because this situation didn't arise until in the episode. So there's no way that could have been the case. Shaw just magically, for no reason, said, "I'm going to now listen to Picard because he's in charge."
So anyway, so then they're like, "Yeah, we're not giving them to you," and they shoot at the Shrike.
Picard even issued the command to fire weapons on the Titan. How?
Well,
even if he was a diplomatic leader, he would not have the authority to authorize that.
I think the thing is, I think that what this, and I'm not even sure that the writer intended this, but what this partially points out is that the people on the Titan don't respect Shaw being forced to choose. They'll follow Admiral Picard and not him.
Yeah, but that shouldn't have even been set up that way. You mentioned earlier about this is all about writing. This isn't a reality camera that's pointing here. There is no way a Star Trek writer would have set up a situation where they've already established this retired admiral has no authority. It's a big stretch to say because it went diplomatic, now he's got control, because I don't believe that's the case here. But then to have that retired admiral with no authority now give orders to fire weapons while the captain's standing right next to him, that makes no sense to me at all. In the narrative, it makes no sense whatsoever. It just doesn't. I do not agree that this makes any organic sense at all based on what they did in the previous episode with Shaw, basically saying you have no power here.
Yeah, they shot at the Shrike, and then they take off to go hide in the nebula. And it's a situation of, in order to get us, they're going to have to find us first.
They're going to redo Wrath of Khan, I'm imagining, next week inside the nebula, but whatever.
Yeah, so, I mean, this was a rather ridiculous episode. Oh, God. There were times when I could not stop laughing, especially after that, when the Titan first got there and just rammed itself between the Helios and the Shrike kind of got thrown off.
Yeah, it's like somebody runs and rams their shoulder.
Oh, God.
It's hilarious.
And I'm sure they thought that looked cool, and probably a lot of people thought that looked cool. I thought it looked hilarious.
This episode, if this episode is not in a holodeck, then it is either so badly done that it is unintentionally cheesy funny, or it's just made cheesy funny. But if it's just made on purpose cheesy funny, if you like any of these Star Trek ideas that they're trying to push, see, I'm not a big believer in the Section 31 storylines. I think those are not fitting for Star Trek, but I know Deep Space Nine, and there's a lot of Deep Space Nine fans that love Section 31. But if you love Section 31, the way Rafi was dealing with all this, the way the writers set up this Section 31 stuff, it was so ridiculous. They are making fun of the stuff that you love. They're making fun of it. And if you like Star Trek as far as chain of command and military type stuff, this stuff was so ridiculously set up, they're making fun of that too, either intentionally or unintentionally. Now, the reason that I think this is still in the holodeck, or this is in the holodeck, is, and somebody correct me here because I'm trying to remember if this technique was used anywhere else in Star Trek, but the Dutch angle technique is basically when you tilt the camera. You know, we made the joke about the Penguin in 1960s Batman. They used the Dutch angle to show basically that this person was bad, possibly unhinged, but usually just bad. I only remember the Dutch angle being used in real Star Trek on TOS, and that's usually when there was some condition that was causing some sort of mental situation to happen and they would tilt the camera. Discovery had a little bit of that tilting, but I mean, they had upside down cameras and everything. I don't even think they were using Dutch angle. They were just doing ridiculous angles in Star Trek Discovery season 1 and 2. But there were several scenes in this. There was at least one scene, I think there were two scenes, with the Penguin on her Penguin ship. And when she was sitting on her throne, just overacting and over the top, it was a Dutch angle. When Jack was in the brig, there was one scene where there was a Dutch angle there. And why else would they use the Dutch angle? I mean, maybe they're just incompetent and they don't know when the Dutch angle is supposed to be used, the people filming this. Or there's a reason for this to tell us something's not right here. That's why I think I'm still believing that this is inside a holodeck and we're getting clues to this. Now, that doesn't mean that I like this story, the being in a holodeck. I'm just saying I'm at least willing to say, let's hope that's what this is. Because if this is at face value, just what is being presented, and I've heard some people rumor that this is the conspiracy storyline from season 1 of TNG, I've already said they're making fun of Star Trek. If this isn't in some sort of holodeck situation, then they're making fun of this stuff. I would hope it's not the conspiracy storyline because they're just going to make fun of it. Like they're making fun of everything here. So the only way that this holds any weight for me is if this is inside a holodeck. And if it's not, why are you using the Dutch angles? That's supposed to convey something. If you're just using it because you think it looks cool, then you don't know why you're using a Dutch angle to begin with. So this thing was hilarious. It was like watching Sharknado. Enjoying is probably the wrong word to use here, but I appreciated this episode more than the last one because the last one I just despised. There was no joy at all. I laughed out loud several times. I was making fun of what they're presenting on screen. So if this is Star Trek now, it's meant to be belittled and laughed at. Fine. This is up there when Soong was trying to run over the Picards in season 2 of Picard. If that's what Star Trek is now, go have at it. Enjoy what you call Star Trek now. It is something to be belittled and made fun of.
I don't even know what to say about this. It wasn't as good as Sharknado because I'm really into the Asylum films and I love stuff like that. But it was close. And if it was unintentional, oh God, if it was intentional, good job, but you just need to be a little bit more over the top. Just a little bit more. If you're trying to do something serious, boy, this was not good at all.
That's why this better be a holodeck program. Otherwise, this is, I think, spitting in the face of Star Trek fans.
And that's why I still maintain, I think I'm just going to have to admit, I think you're right. I think this might be a holodeck program.
Those Dutch angles are what, unless they're truly incompetent filming things, which as dark as it is maybe, but those Dutch angles were to me going something, they're trying to convey something's not right here because they didn't just Dutch angle female penguin. They gave a quick Dutch angle to Jack Crusher.
Yeah, Jack Crusher.
Jack Riker. Maybe that's the twist we don't know about yet.
Well, we all know about Riker.
So that's, to me, it's like, well, they're trying, if this was competent filmmaking, they're trying to convey something's not right here with the Dutch angles, if they're using them correctly. And that's why I'm still wondering if this is a holodeck program and all this over-the-top stuff is just more feeding into that.
Well,
I hope.
How else did Amanda Plummer's character have that knowledge about Shaw and his mental problems? How did she see his psych profile?
Well, I mean, they could explain that away, that she had an operative that tapped into whatever. But yeah, why that specific captain, versus the entire Starfleet armada?
Well, because they're just so advanced and they have access to Starfleet's database. And so they looked it up and they looked up the Titan and they saw, oh, here's Captain Shaw. He's the captain of this particular vessel. And then they pulled up all of his information and she read it right before she contacted them.
Because they weren't even supposed to be there. They were going in the other direction in 7 of 9 in the last episode. And 7 of 9, while Shaw was sleeping, she went in the other direction. Because Shaw even said, well, that's in the other direction. We're not going there. So it doesn't even make sense for Amanda Plummer just organically to say, well, this is the ship that's patrolling this area. I should get to know their people. He wasn't even supposed to be there.
No, she clearly has a backdoor into Starfleet's database, and she can access it with their super sensors while she's in that nebula just beyond Federation space. It just... but she can't find a ship inside a nebula. I just... As I said, there are so many things about this that contradict other things in this story, and it's so over the top. That's why I can't believe that this is just an actual episode.
Yeah, like this is somebody thinking, I'm making good Star Trek.
This has to be...
It's gotta be something else, a twist to it.
A dream or... in the holodeck. It has to be.
Everything's exaggerated. Even all the dialogue, all the disagreements, it wasn't just disagreements. It was telenovela emotions firing at each other in every single exchange, whether it was Shaw in 7 of 9 or Jacker and pretty much anybody. All the exchanges were so over the top. Amanda Plummer, this wasn't just a matter of, hey, it's one of those type of people that are just fun to hate. No, this person was so over the top comedic. There was nothing menacing about them at all. It was just for laughs. I was laughing so hard when she was... I want to see more of her, but for the wrong reasons, because she was so hilarious. I want to see more of her.
Yeah, and I don't know if you caught it, but there was also a mention of Jack Crusher's prowess with the ladies. I mean, it was like, oh my goodness gracious. I was... just part of the time sitting there with my mouth hanging open and part of the time just sitting there laughing. I don't know. I mean, I can't recommend that you watch this episode, but if you do watch this episode, we thought it was hysterically funny. That's just our thoughts on that.
Of the 2 episodes, if I had to watch one again, I would watch this one again because I got something positive out of it, which was laughing hysterically. That first episode, again, I know we've had commenters that say they liked it. I'm not trying to disrespect you, but from my opinion, and I think I speak for Mollie here, that was a bad episode. Last week's was just bad. It was callbacks and the like. This week's, the only callback I caught directly, and maybe I'm misreading it, but they seem to be using what I call the V'ger horn. It's kind of like the Inception horn, but obviously this came before that. It's just the V'ger, that's the only thing they were using that was like a direct callback. There were some subtle pieces here and there, but nothing like episode 1, which was ridiculous in a not laughing way. Just, what are you doing? This episode, I laughed. The first few minutes with him being boarded, like I said in the beginning of our review, it reminded me of the Expanse episode where the Martian patrols, and that's a compliment, by the way, because I actually liked that scene in the Expanse, and this had a feeling of that. And then after that scene, forget it. It went into farce. It was just so ridiculous. So if you want to make fun of Star Trek or what they're calling Star Trek, that's probably a way to say go ahead and watch this. If you just want to watch somebody make fun of Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is what the other YouTubers were referring to when they said that this actively makes fun of other Kurtzman Trek.
Maybe they were just presenting Shaw is just, I don't know, maybe he's supposed to represent like Michael Burnham, thinking that they're always right and following the rules, but they're actually not. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this is making fun of previous Kurtzman Trek. I don't know how it's mapping other than it's just as ridiculous in a comedic way as the stuff that came before it that they're trying to do in a serious way.
Well, and plus, was that Ferengi supposed to actually represent the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland? Because that first season of Star Trek Discovery actually did have the Alice in Wonderland theme, even down to Michael Burnham having the book as a child. You know, I mean, it just...
Yeah, maybe they were making a funny reference to that.
And then Wharf decapitated Sneed, the caterpillar. Again, you know, I mean, but I'm kind of reaching there.
If that is it, let's just say it's at face value that, then this is nothing more than a farce. It's a farce that's not even worth watching unless you want to watch people be made fun of.
Or do we have to go back and rewatch Pinocchio? Because previously in Picard, it was obvious that they were doing the whole Pinocchio thing. Even to the point where there were some scenes where you saw the guy who stayed behind in the past, Captain, whatever his name was. Yeah, and he's sitting there in his ship, and it looks like he's sitting inside a whale. The interior of the ship looks like whale bones, like in Pinocchio.
Oh, Captain Rios?
Yeah, Captain Rios, thank you. When Captain Rios was sitting in his ship, and it looked like the interior of the ship looked like the interior of the whale in Pinocchio. And we know that going all the way back to TNG, there was a reference to Data as being Pinocchio.
In that first encounter at Farpoint, that's what Riker called him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so... I keep watching this, trying to figure out, well... You know, because so far with Kurtzman Trek, they did Alice in Wonderland, they did Pinocchio. There was another one that I don't remember now what it was. But they have been using these better-known works and using them, I guess, as inspiration. And I keep looking at this, trying to figure out, well, what did they use for this one? Because, again, it was filmed in tandem with Season 2. You can't tell me that this isn't just more of the same. It was literally filmed back to back with the other. So yeah. I don't
know what they're doing. That's why I was pushing the holodeck thing. And as I said, those Dutch angles this week, plus how over the top it was, make me really start to wonder that theory is not just a, hey, let's have fun and make a video speculating. I'm starting to wonder if that's an actual thing. This has nothing to do with anything overt. This mostly has to do with Mollie and I's viewing of what we watch. But there was a character in this episode, and I think she was supposed to be a Deltan because she had a bald head, but maybe that's not true.
I thought she was Romulan or Vulcan. Yeah, Romulan or Vulcan.
I heard her voice, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's Hammerhead. We weren't sure about that, and then Mollie, after the episode, looked up an IMDb. That is Hammerhead. So by Hammerhead, if you remember I'm sure it applies in the comic book too, but I didn't read the comic book, but the TV series, the DC TV series Doom Patrol, Jane has these different personas. Actually, Jane is one of these different personas. The protector persona is Hammerhead, and Hammerhead is played by the same actress. So every time she was talking, I kept saying, Hammerhead. And if she's a reoccurring character, I know it's not intended. The actor is portraying the character so far seriously, but for me, that's another comedic thing. Look, Hammerhead's on the ship. It's probably not fair to the actress, but that's what I know her as. So for me, as a personal experience watching this whole episode made me laugh. It made me laugh so hard. In that sense, I guess I enjoyed it, but I don't think it's for the reasons I'm supposed to.
Yeah, for all the wrong reasons.
We're looking to create a mirrored channel on Rumble, because after what we've seen happen to Angry Joe's channel, and he's a much bigger channel than we are, but I don't know if that's the beginning of something larger that CBS is going to be doing to channels reviewing this stuff. We're still going to publish to YouTube, but we also have a channel created on Rumble, because Rumble seems, we haven't been on there for very long, but it seems like they're more open to fair use of material as far as critiques and reviews and commentary, where YouTube seems to be willy-nilly about it. If this starts to go down where we're not able to put up material because we're fighting copyright stuff that CBS is doing, you might jump over to Rumble. The channel's named the same thing. We have the same logo with both of our faces on it. So if you just look at Rumble, look for Mollie and the Old Man, you'll see us. Just go ahead and subscribe to us. We're going to publish on YouTube and Rumble, and we're talking about maybe making some more in-depth critiques, maybe between seasons, about things that YouTube wouldn't allow us to do. So there might be some extra material on Rumble that we're not going to be able to do on YouTube. We might put an ad on YouTube for it, but then you'll have to go to Rumble to watch the full thing. So I just wanted to mention that. That's something we're planning on doing.
Yeah, only 2 videos over there right now. But we just want to be prepared in case YouTube goes really sideways, especially after what they did to the Angry Joe show, taking down his review of episode 1 on alleged copyright reasons, when what he was doing was very obviously fair use. Anyway, anybody else watch this episode? What did you think? Did you laugh your way through it too? Leave your comments below so that we have a good time talking about this.
Take care.